So we have a wide variety of experiences here, and everybody's kind of specialized in different things. I'm wondering, in your particular arena, what was the hardest skill to learn? And I'll just throw that out to anyone. What was the hardest skill to learn about cutting the kinds of things that you cut?
I think in reality, it's all about storytelling, and you have to, but again, you don't have the same tools you do when it's actually scripted and somebody knows what they're doing going in. So it's sort of, I think the great skill is figuring out where that fun and that story thread is and shaping that into something that makes sense and you can follow even though.
And how do you learn that? Is that something that is just learned by doing over time, or is there a way to learn it?
I think doing it, being around people who are good at it, learning through if you're working with good story people who know what they're doing and other editors. And again, I think I really learned a lot from working in features where even though you have a script, you end up a lot of times completely changing it before it's over. You don't change, you can dramatically change, and you learn that, oh gee, if we take this out and put this thing at the front and swap it all around, it becomes something different. Because when I started on Real World, I saw documentary as being something a little bit more pure. It's funny now. Now, like Real World is considered like a pure, almost like pure documentary compared to most reality. But I kind of wanted to be real true to what actually happened in that moment and realize, no, you got to, it's like this is supposed to be a sad moment. So, you find something of the girl sitting on the stairs looking off into space because, I don't know, her lunch hadn't arrived yet. And, or somebody farts and she goes, but you play that as being she got insulted and she looked at, or, she's sad because her boyfriend hasn't called. So it's true to the story that you're trying to tell and what really happened. It's like, yeah, as soon as her boyfriend called, she slammed on the phone and she left and we don't have any footage of that. You don't have footage of what you need, so you figure out other ways to put that together. You play a piece of music and you have somebody walking down the street in the rain, and that's a sad moment. And so there really is sort of a craft to that of just kind of figuring out and knowing, just because something cuts off here and everybody leaves or the camera cuts off, the scene isn't over. You have to go somewhere else and find a way to build it out.
Good. Does anybody else, when I ask if there was some skill that was particularly difficult or challenging to learn?
For me, it was probably working with clients. Was
Really?
The hardest part, yeah.
So how do you learn? I mean, yeah, that seems like it would be challenging. How do you learn?
There's various.
You're not
people
alone
give
in that
you
dark room, right?
People give you various answers, but I think it's like 70% of our job is the dealing with the client part. Yeah. When you really get down to it, the learning. I mean, you're a psychologist and a therapist and a negotiator, and I don't know how many different ways you.
And how do you learn that? Because unlike you, Billy, where you're working with a editor or with a director very, very well. With you, Terry, it could be somebody different every week. It probably is.
Yeah.
So so you're faced with a whole range of different personalities.
Oh yeah. I guess some of it's natural, some of it's from various personal life experiences or whatever. But I mean, I've had people melt down in my bay. I mean, just completely melt down. I've had people go insane, throwing stuff around. Completely unrelated to me, but you're sitting there going, what do I do? At this point.
Have you ever melt down in front of
No, you can't. That's the problem. We're in that unique position. Well, actually, I've walked out of 3 sessions in my life, but you for the most part, you can't. That's your job. You're getting paid to be there, and there's the client is just like in business. The customer's always right. Well, the client's always right. So
We go home and take it out on our wives.
Although in my experience, because a lot of times I have to work with mixers and I come in and do finishing guys and, on an online or whatever. And of course, they're part of my world. They're not the suits. They're part of my world. And they're, I feel we're all kind of a team. And, you're the next link in the chain. And sometimes by that point, I am so fried or something's just gone horribly wrong. And it's like, I've not freaked out a lot again because you can't. And, the rush for me has always been, I will get it done on time and it will get, we are going to make this. Because there's a lot of impossible deadlines and that's the rush for me. Getting it done when it's impossible. But I've had like, oh my God, I may make this huge mistake, or we've got to cut something in the online, or we've got to literally fix it in the mix. And, I really trust these guys to, if I'm like, oh, and I'll just have a temper tantrum because I've just gotten the word from my suit or whomever that, everything has gone to hell. And he's got to help me. And these guys, I can't tell you how many times, they've gotten me through it. And it's somebody with an attitude that is just the kind of attitude I have to have on my end of it, that, you go into a lab or something and, I'm literally cutting a scene in the lab because the MPAA said, they see blood, or they think they see drugs and it's actually a towel, which has actually happened to me.
Now the good stories are coming out.
Yeah.
I love this.
And no, that's cocaine. No, it's not. It's a gym towel. What the hell are you talking about? Who are you people anyway? I'm all about the conspiracy theory on that one.
So, it's interesting. We've talked about, it seems like, okay, you need people skills, you need organization skills. Do you feel like the qualities you need to be an editor are different depending on what you're, whether you're a reality TV editor or a trailer editor or a film editor? Or are there certain qualities that above the board, if you're going to be an editor, you have to have these skills? How does that work?
I think, like what Terry said, I think so much of the job is politics. I think that's the case in any kind of, in any movie situation. You could be a prop person, a makeup person. It doesn't matter what your job is. So much of it is political and moving the project through the process. And so the better the mix of people on a project, it makes it move in a more comfortable and pleasant way. I've gotten rid of people in the cutting room because they don't mesh enough with everybody else. And it's not, when I say mesh, it's not a matter of people having the same opinion. It's a whole personality issue. And you really want people to get along in a way, in the most creative way. I tell every assistant that comes to work with me, what they're there for is their opinion. I'm not hiring them for their technical skill. I'm hiring them because of what they think about things. And it has to do with the thing we're working on, but it also has to do with their attitudes about life and their attitudes about what it's like to work with other people and how they get along with people. It's so important. But especially I can't talk about TV as much because I've only worked a little bit in TV, but in movies, it's so important because the politics of it are such a huge part of it. Like what Terry said, people have to come in and piss on it, and turn off your cell phone. And it's true. You can't avoid it. Well,
I'm curious, how many times does our assistants on a film, does the editor ask their opinions?
With me?
With you, it sounds like all the time.
It's all day long.
Yeah, but with that doesn't sound that typical to me.
It's anyone who comes into the room.
Yeah.
Let me show you something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a certain egolessness, too, that you have to have as an editor, it seems.
Well, in a way, but what it really is it's that you have the knowledge that what you need is fresh eyes looking at it, because that's what matters. That's who the audience is. The audience isn't the people that work on it.
Yeah,
you never trust the people that work on it.
Right.
When I ask someone about a scene I've cut, I have no interest in what they liked about it. What I want to know is what didn't work. And that's what really gets you a step ahead.
And I've learned not to be proprietary, that it's, and it's sometimes very difficult. Because it's, for a person that's basically insecure as I am, I could not have picked a worse job because it can get very personal. When you just,
Right, actor,
thank God, As Billy says, I know now that I can always use a fresh pair of eyes. And you learn kind of, and I think maybe that's what you're talking about when you say who you allow in, who's working in your cutting room. You know who, whether they know sink from a hole in the ground, they have a sense, and you treasure those people. Of course, you need somebody that knows what they're doing, but I'm always looking for, I'm always very interested in what people think of the work that I've done, and what they can bring to it. Now, there's BS changes too, but again, as he says, usually those come from the people that are, move this 5 frames over. You would know 5 frames if it slapped you in the face, So, but I'll do it if that's, what you need. If it doesn't ruin it, if it's not a house of cards, I'll do it. But yeah, it's a communal effort. And as Billy says, and I love the way you say that, we're all involved. Each one of us, the better we do the job, the more we care, and that's from the the most insignificant, what might be called the most insignificant person on a film, all the way through to the, I don't know, to the theater itself in many ways. And, I'm very protective of the films I work on. I know that I'm a part of that.
So does anybody have, we've gotten bits of juicy stories. Does anybody have a really good, juicy, worst possible scenario story that they want to tell?
I mean, I've had situations, too many situations. So, but I've had situations where, for any of you who've seen this movie, Beverly Hills Cop, there's a scene when Eddie Murphy goes into an art gallery, and there's a young guy working in the art gallery. He has a very strange accent. The actor's name is Bronson Pinchot. It's a very famous scene in the movie. People love the scene. The dailies came in on that scene, and they were very much as the scene was. And the guy who was the head of production at the studio at that time said, "You have to reshoot the scene. It's terrible. It's the stupidest, unfunniest scene I've ever seen." So the producers said, "We don't think you're right. And we're not even going to go to the director about this. You're wrong." And he said, "No, I'm right. It's a horrible scene." And we didn't reshoot it, and we cut it together. And when we first ran the movie for an audience, they couldn't stop laughing at this guy, and it was extremely successful. And we didn't hear. He never said, "Oh, I guess you were right and I was wrong."
I'll never hear that.
Never.
No.
And I've had several situations like that. I had to cut a scene in Top Gun the day I started on the movie, a scene with Kelly McGillis. Tom Cruise goes over to Kelly McGillis's house for dinner. And that was the first thing I had to cut, because the reason I had to cut it was because the studio was going to fire her, and they were going to reshoot every scene that she had already shot, and they thought she was horrible. And the producers said to me, "We don't want to do that. We're not in love with Kelly McGillis. We don't think she's great, but we don't want to reshoot her stuff with another actress. So you have to cut this so the studio says you don't have to fire her." So that was my first thing on that picture. And I did it, and the first thing we did is, but we didn't even show the scene to the director. We didn't have time. I cut it, took it, put some music into it, took it to the screening room at the studio, ran it for the head of the studio, and he said, "Okay, you don't have to fire her."
Wow.
But stuff like that happens constantly. It has nothing to do with the movie, but it has everything to do with the making of the movie.
So in other words, it's a miracle that a good movie ever gets made.
Well, Larry
basically.
Gordon, the producer, used to say, instead of giving Oscars for Best Picture, they should give Oscars for getting a picture made.
Yes.
Albert Brooks said one time, whenever he goes on a studio lot, he sees all these cars in the parking lot. He says, "Every one of those cars represents a person who stands between me and getting my movie there."
Yeah.
That's great stuff. Well, I think we're going to be close to wrapping it up. What I'd love people to say now is, advice to anybody who wants to be where you're, somebody who wants to cut trailers or cut reality TV or cut films. How has your career changed since you got in it, and what kind of advice can you offer to somebody who's interested in climbing that particular ladder? Billy, start with you.
My career what I do has changed radically since I started, because nothing's cut on film anymore. And a little difference to Carol, thank God it's not cut on film, as far as I'm concerned. I hope I never see a frame of film again. And I hate it. As a matter of fact, I was going to get out of the business around 1993, 94. I didn't want to cut again. I didn't want to cut film again. People, they went from shooting 100,000 feet of film to 1.5 million feet of film, and it really, really made it hard to cut on film. And so, and it switched over to digital editing. It was phenomenal, as far as it's the best thing to me that's ever happened. So, so that, though, has radically changed the cutting room. The job of an assistant now is so much harder than it was when you were working on film. And also the job as the editor. I used to know everything that my assistants had to know. I knew it as good or better than they did. I don't now. I don't know what a lot of what they do entails. And so it's up to them to do it, not up to me to know what to do. And some people had to learn it from scratch. Other people, it came very easy. But, you know, I've been very lucky. I've been blessed with the people that I've worked with. But it's changed. You know, it's changed the world of the cutting room. It's changed the day-to-day, minute-to-minute work experience in the cutting room. It hasn't changed for me as an editor. So learning how to cut electronically came very quickly to me because I knew what I wanted to learn, because I knew what I wanted to do, and the people that created the software, the nonlinear editing software, are geniuses. It's astounding to me. I've never gotten over it, how they came up with it. The first system I ever worked on was Lightworks, and then I went from Lightworks to Avid. Lightworks took me about a week. I went from Lightworks to Avid, I learned it in a day. So once you learned one, it was really easy to learn the other one.
So Billy, though, how do you break into film editing, though, right now? Is it harder to get into that whole, is that apprenticeship, you know, apprentice, third, second, first assistant? You think it's
everything's
easier now?
easier because one is this 8-year thing's gone. And, you know, and if you work in a non-union situation, it's very easy to get into the union just by showing pay stubs. And, you know, and they'll get you in, they'll let you in. The other thing is the digital world has made it easier to make films. So because of that, all of the jobs in the post-production end of it, there's more of it. And it's easier to do because it's not on film, it's digital. So people learn it. When kids get out of high school, they all know how to do Final Cut Pro. It's great. That's a huge leg up. And so you can go into a project and say, I can cut something for you, I can cut that. And you can show that you can do it. Because you know the software, you know the computer, you know the system, it's good. It's opening up the world of filmmaking to me. I think it's a really good thing. The studios are now making far fewer films. As a result, there's going to be fewer product to fill the thousands of screens that now exist in the country. I'm hoping that makes room for smaller films to get into those same theaters that couldn't get in there before. Because those are better movies than the studios are making.
There are more screens, period. It's now just...
That's what I mean. There's so many screens.
It's not just movie screens, it's TV
and it's computer
screens.
And
computer
TVs,
screens,
right.
And mobile phone
so
screen.
I think that there's more... I'm hoping there's more opportunity for more films. And if that's the case, then there's more opportunity for people to work on them. The great thing to me about editing is you have positive reinforcement all day long. I do, from making one cut that works, makes me feel good. You know, and some people don't get that all day in their job.
In their careers.
And in their careers. And when in editing, you get it all day long, every day. It doesn't matter what you're working on. You can be this terrible $100,000 horror movie I cut, or it can be a Thin Red Line. You know, you get the same positive feedback. And
you have a really positive view of, you know, the world of upcoming for editors. What about anybody else? Do you have advice for, you know, how people should, you know, how your job has changed and how you think people should, you know, set their sights on your job? Not your particular job. Being an editor.
I think.
Well, in my world, I think the best thing is just to work at some level. Our company, Buena Murray, where I work a lot, the one standard entry-level job is being a logger, which is kind of adjunct to the story department. And you go and you see everything, and then you see what happens to it. And it's like I used to say when I cut features, I used to say, man, our apprentice editor, or like even a free apprentice or an apprentice editor, this entry-level person, knows more about how that movie got made than anybody else but the director outside of that room. Because you sit through that whole thing and you see what happened and what didn't. And that's just an amazing learning experience. So if you get in your foot in the door at a decent company, and some companies, you know, you can move up pretty quickly, or there is room to move up. So you can start as a logger or assistant editor, or you you move into something else, maybe work in a story department, and then in anything, I'm sure everyone would corroborate this, there's always like, oh shit, somebody's sick, somebody had to go home, we need somebody who can just slap this thing together, can you do it? And or we can't afford a real editor, will you do it for 99 cents?
Yeah.
And say, that's how I got the Madonna job, that's how I got my first feature. They couldn't afford anybody they wanted.
But you got to be able to deliver when that opportunity.
Right.
hits.
You have to be able to deliver, but if it's it's usually serendipity how you get some kind of break. But then if you do, then it's like, oh, hey, this guy over here can do this. I had somebody who we had a big editor turnover and other stuff, people being pulled off of Project Runway. At the end, and when it's like, okay, well, you get this guy who was kind of like not higher than assistant editor, but more of a graphics guy, hadn't really cut a show, and it's like, okay, well, I got some other people to cover for him, whatever. He did a fantastic job. He just like totally understood it, didn't, great with taking notes, everything fast. And so, I told everybody else, this guy did a really great job. And so,
In other words, get prepared.
yeah, but I mean, so he'll go places, but he's got the opportunity to do that. But you got to come to the table with something.
Right.
It's not,
Yeah.
if you get that opportunity and you can't do it.
Right.
I've also known people who got that opportunity prematurely,
Right.
Yeah.
and then got crushed because they weren't ready, they couldn't perform, they didn't get.
Well,
to
and the good news is you can do all that work. There's no excuse now. You've got your computer at home with Final
Yeah.
Cut
Right,
Pro,
right.
so it's not like you have to have access to specialized tools that you're not going to have access
That's
to.
very true.
Yeah, and you can also analyze. You can look at how others have shows. I mean, that was one of the things I was doing early on is watching, learning how the other people edited.
Right.
You just really study. Wow, look at that, that's clever.
Are there any questions from the audience? I realize you've been sitting here very patiently for a long time. Yes.
When there's a team of editors on a feature film, how does that process work? Is there like a lead editor who supervises almost like a director of the other editors, or everybody gets chunks?
I'm sure it can be different from each situation. I've done it many times, and so I've been the lead. I've been on a show where I'm the first editor on, and then we hire other people, and I've done shows where I wasn't the first, like I was the third, and I think it's always best when there's a lead editor, and what that person does, though, is you're like the train master. What you really say is, when I'm in the middle of cutting a scene, these dailies, you're going to cut this scene, and that scene goes to that person, and you're just doing that constantly until they finish shooting. Then when they finish shooting and you've got a cut done from beginning to end, depending on the complications of scenes or the amount of footage, sometimes you'll let someone who started a scene stay in that area and just continue recutting that scene, or you'll end up working on a scene that you didn't originally cut, but you'll take it over. It can go many ways, but it's best when there is a lead editor. And there are situations that I know of where the egos have gotten too touchy so that you can't have a, quote, lead editor. And in those situations, the person who cut the first cut of that scene stays with that scene the whole time. They only work on the stuff that they've cut. They don't work on the other person's scenes. I think that's a terrible system, but I know it exists. On 48 Hours, we had a ton of footage and we didn't have a lot of time. We all worked on each other's stuff. Whoever was finished something that they had just finished working on, now they had time to work on something else, grab the next thing that we need recut. And I'm not a believer in editing styles. I believe the movie determines how it should be cut. The film, the script, the acting, that determines it, not the editor. When they do it right, when you have a good script and good actors, you want to get out of the way. And basically cut to the rhythm of their performance. When you do that, it looks seamless. And I used to tell people, the key, this is when we were cutting film still, so you had picture and track. If there's no cuts in the track, that means you had a really good performance, because your picture cuts are all based on the rhythm of the performance. And that's really what it's about. It's what editing is about, is letting the performance and the script rise to the surface. So you cut all the crap out, sort of, and let the good stuff come to the surface. And the good stuff is usually all about acting.
It seems like a beautiful place to end, but I think Billy and everybody else will be around afterwards for more one-on-one questions.
Sure,
Is that
yeah.
okay? Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.